and welcome to By the Fire podcast, where I, Ken, your host, take you through mythical tales and creatures from across the Black diaspora. So today, you now have the opportunity to listen to part 2 of my interview with Reni K and Amayo. I really hope you enjoy it, and stay tuned for the end, where I have an announcement to make. One thing that I really loved about the book was the main theme of hope, because, you know, we have Nala who, you know, she lost her family when she was, well, if you haven't read the book yet, the first book, then you should have read it by now. But, you know, she lost her family in that massacre. And then you have Sinai, who is from the palace, but she's not quite part of everyone else because she's like an orphan of some sort.
She's worse. She's worse actually. She's considered an illegitimate child, so I call it an Efuala. So a child that there's evidence that they have noble blood, but they've been sort of like giving up secretly as an Efuala, so that the assumption is that there's some sort of like scandal that's gone on to produce this child. So even though they are allowed to be in the court and to, like, you know, be amongst the nobles, there is a stigma against her in society. So she's sort of like the perpetual outcast.
Yes. So I think with both cases, and even with, I like how you mentioned about an outcast, because even with Nala, who she had her grandmother and she had her family, but didn't really know like her own mother. And there was that whole idea of like, she would look at her grandparents and her uncle and think, I don't look like them, or they don't look like me. So even that whole, like, even within family, feeling like an outcast. So they both had that similarities, you know? So, and then on top of that, they have their abilities they have. So Nala being able to control elements, Sinai being able to fly. And I think that whole story of hope comes with them realizing that they are sisters. And it's confusing, and the whole idea of twins in the society is very taboo anyway, so they are really reluctant to address that and actually acknowledge that, okay, yes, but it comes eventually with time, which is quite interesting.
No, because for me, I was thinking about this for a while, because, you know, with the end of Daughters of Nri, it was with their initial meeting, where, and in a very big way, you know, they meet in this big way where it's like overwhelming and all this stuff has happened. But what is clear is that there's like a connection between the two of them, an unspoken connection. And then I was just thinking about, okay, like both characters and where they leave off, you know, on the back of like everything that's happened. And one thing that was like really interesting for me to know was that I think Nala is she's such a super interesting character, because I think, you know, throughout Daughters of Nri, she's just been powering through with like one goal, which is like to almost like right the wrong that she's seen happen in her village. And that's almost been an obsessive, you know, compulsion, just like throw herself into this thing where, you know, that is like what her focus is. And once that goal has been met, I think that's when all the thoughts and feelings and implications and all the other stuff gets thrown into her as a person, and then combined with the fact that she's met with this person who finally she's able to actually connect with in a way that she's never been able to connect with her actual family. I think for that, like, that brings in so many different elements. It's like confusion, but then also an incredible amount of guilt, you know, where it's like you spend your life kind of like wishing for someone who can connect with you or doesn't look at you like you're crazy for the things that you want or the way that you are. And then, you know, you meet this person, but it's on the back of the horrible destruction of people, of the trauma, exactly. So I think for Nala's journey is very interesting in the book, where she's sort of like working through those emotions, I think the best way that she can. And I think, you know, where Sinai, when I was thinking about Sinai, I was just like, Sinai has grown up always like, you know, almost like forever without a family. She got the first taste of it with the palace cook Mikuli Coriander in the first book. That was her first case of like, okay, someone's actually looking out for me, someone actually wants me to do well, and you know, someone cares. And not to give away any spoilers, but that didn't end up in very, very positive for her in the end. So I do think that there's an element of Sanaya that's just always like grasping for that concept of family, and then suddenly it comes in the form of Nala, and then there's a bit of like hesitance there from her, and so she's just, it's like that dynamic to begin with, I think is a tricky one to deal with, and I do imagine that it's like it'll be a point of frustration almost for readers in the where people are just like, oh, I just want them to get along, like, come on, just be sister. I've been waiting so long for you to meet. But then I do think that what it does do in a really brilliant way is, if I don't say so myself, if I say so myself, what I really like about that whole concept is I think it strengthens the deepness of their ultimate relationship, because I know that from like I have 2 sisters and a brother, and I think one of the great things about family and like sibling relationships is that there's almost like an undercurrent where it's like, yes, I can be angry with you, but I still completely have your back, and I think there's a deepness there that forms when you know that actually I can be annoyed with you, or I almost like accept that, okay, you're not at your best right now.
No.
I can accept that from you. I'll still tell you off, I'll still put my foot down, but I can accept that about you. And then the next day it's going to be like it never happened. So I think that sort of like relationship is something that I really wanted to build up for the girls. And yeah, it was good. I think it's good because it's always, even though I know it's a point of contention, I think, for people, but tension is good in stories. You never actually want to be at the point where you're just like, oh yay, everything's going great, because that's usually a signal one that something terrible is about to happen next, or that after a few more pages of this, you're going to be like, okay, so next things are going a bit too happy now. So that's definitely, I think their dynamic in Descendants of the First is something I'm really keen to see how everyone takes, and then what they like about it. But I definitely it made me really like the both of them, like the sister elements.
Yes, individually and together. I mean, it'll be really cool to see, any plans for the future books, and exploring further their relationship based on what they know now, and potentially, because again, I'm not saying anything, but there are other people in the mix of this family affair now. And I think there's coming up. There's more faces coming up, and there was a lot of like high stake situations in this first book, in terms of many battles from many many sides. Like, it was very, very stressful time for them. I felt really bad. Goodness me. So it'll be really interesting to see how they explore their family dynamic in a future story, perhaps.
I think there's I feel like what I hope is that every book kind of like steps up the whole story. I do feel like that's been the case with, I think, Daughters of Nri, was its story, and I think Descendants of the First is definitely a step up in terms of just like everything that's happening, the emotions, the depth of the world, and also the depth of the characters. And so the third book, I'm just like, oof, it's gonna be intense. It's gonna be a wild ride. It's gonna be super exciting. But I love stories that make you feel, like really take you through, where you're just like, whoa, what is happening here? So that's what we're building up to.
Exactly. And I think going back to that whole theme of hope, you wrote a really beautiful letter about how you wrote the first during like really rough times like COVID, and what was happening around the world with technically a civil rights movement. So,
Yeah.
how did Hope help you construct this final book? Because honestly, writing a book during lockdown, like kudos to you, because it was very like we've heard this term so many times, but unprecedented. It was
Yeah.
something that it made the world stop. So how were you able to
Yeah.
use Hope to help you finish this great book?
I think actually, I think one of those, I think writing under writing under the need of hope actually
Yep.
is it's not something that is new to me actually. I think it's almost like something that help, or I don't want to say it helps because I don't want to sort of like call on more stress
Yep.
for the next few books. But I do feel like it's something that doesn't put off my writing. If anything, it just helps me kind of like think more about these concepts I want to explore.
Mm.
When I was writing Daughters of Nri, I was so stressed out in life. Like I was working at like a super, super high, intense, like very intense job. That I was just like, on one hand, it was like, awful. On the other
Yeah.
hand, everyone was telling me, you're so lucky to have this job. So it's like, almost like this feeling that I have to, really do this. I have to put my all into this.
Yep.
So that was the context behind why I wrote Daughters of Nri with, and with Descendants of the First. It was that element of like the world just like going through such like a difficult times, and in my opinion, like I could see it all stemming it down from like the systems that we've currently have in place, and then it's like people like reacting to these things. And in my head, it was definitely like a thought experiment where I was just like, things are really bad, and we can't just throw the wrong thing at it,
Yes.
So that was like that was for me, that was like the source of hope really. And then of course, with things like Black Lives Matter and everything, it's just like that we have these huge institutions that are inherently racist, and it's not, I just feel like it's not about sort of like changing, a head of police, or like, focusing on one person who's, was caught on camera. It's all about the whole like institution behind it. So I think that like me kind of like just looking at that, and playing around with it, almost playing around with it within the world of like Descendants of the First, like playing around with like that idea of like politics and the different people who aspire for power and the impact that has on the general public, and just like going into those like different elements and people and how we approach these things. I think that was like really helpful for me, like just as a way to put down my thoughts, and then helping these like characters, fight through that system in their own way. I think that was definitely a source of like hope for me, and then that's something I really wanted to leave the readers with at the end, where it's just like, okay, so like, we've gone through a rough time together, we've gone through the story, everyone's had their ups and downs, but ultimately there is this sense of, the hope that you can find with the connections that you make, with other people, and how that can, feed into what the next step is towards like a better future.
Exactly.
So yeah,
that's great. And honestly, I really love how you mentioned the politics side, which like I don't really have time for, but to talk about. But that was that was a great part of the book as well, to be honest. That alone could be a side short story. Battles between the men who were left, and what people were doing to try and get into power. Because that side of it, that was a whole crazy mess.
No, I do love political dramas, and that function of society, when you kind of like see these different people scrambling, because I think that there's so much emotions to play around with. I think that there's this myth when you sort of like see things like, okay, politicians and government and all this stuff, that it's like very serious, and like everyone is sort of like, straight face, but actually I think that they express so much, like such a huge range of emotions just solely through what they're trying to do, like that grasp for power, like holding it, getting it, all this stuff. And I think that makes such a fun thing to play around with when it comes to just like storytelling.
The first and Daughters of Nri is very much fantasy, but the great thing about fantasy as a genre is that, you know, you can fit in some subgenres in there. So you have like a bit of romance, bit of, you know, political drama, loads of action. Is there, you know, any other genre you'd want to focus on in any free to books you do?
Yeah, so I think so fantasy is definitely my number one. I love exploring like magic in a story, because I think it does add that extra element to life and escapism and everything. I think if I wasn't writing a fantasy, and it's if I wasn't writing a fantasy, I think fantasy is probably the thing I'm going to be writing in terms of like the things I'm working on. It's going to stick in the fantasy realm for a bit. But if not, I do want to take a stab at romance, because I love romance. I love rom-com. And I know that it's funny because I know that people are just like, in terms of like the romance in Daughters of Nri, I think that, you know, everyone's kind of just like, you can bump it up, let's see more romance.
I loved it. It was very much like, oh, the tension is there. Like, it's not that kind of book, so we're not too much, but I loved it.
The thing for me, but the thing for me is, I think it's great, because I think even some people who are kind of like, listen, I love fantasy, but I love fantasy for the romance. I need that. I need that. Some of those people who are just like, even though the romance was very much like the side part of the book, it was very much like a sisterhood story.
Yes.
And then for me, the romance is a huge pivotal part of like the series, but it's very much a slow burn, because I want it to be like heart-wrenching. I want all the feelings expressed there, and for that I kind of want to like take my time with it. But yeah, no, I think a romance novel would be almost like a rom-com novel would be great. I love watching, reading, consuming content about Black women being loved wholeheartedly. So I would love to kind of like put out that in the world, like more of that in the world. So I think that's something that I'll be interested in. And actually, interestingly enough, it's a tough one. But I have been considering like even kind of like writing something like almost like a thriller, you know, like one of those like psychological thrillers. That I think will definitely, it wouldn't be my next book, and who knows if I even like delve down that route. But I do love content that makes you think, you know, when you have like those really good like actually maybe it's not, maybe I'm thinking about the wrong thing as opposed to, I am thinking about psychological thrillers, but maybe not the thriller aspect. I think it's more like the psychological aspect, where you kind of have like characters that are deeply, deeply flawed, navigating through life and situations in their own way. So I do think perhaps even like, you know, something like down that route, but I think ultimately I'm definitely still gripped on fantasy at the moment.
Oh yeah, fair enough. And then with final question with Daughters of Nri, so who is your favorite character, and in the first as well?
So that's it's such a difficult question for me, because it's just hard to say, because I just like it is almost like saying, oh, who's your favorite child, and I feel like you do have one. I do not subscribe to this whole concept of like, you know, parents don't have a favorite child. I think you definitely have a favorite child, but sometimes they change. So I think initially my favorite character was probably actually it's hard to I think it was probably Sanai, you know. I think the reason why it was Sanai was because of the huge potential I saw in her as almost like this character that's like, because of her situation, because she's like this outsider, she and played with kind of like self-doubt. But I also made it so that she actually has an immense amount of power within her.
Yeah.
And as you even like right now, you can see that really, like if you like look at them both, like Nala and Sinai has like more power, kind of like embedded within her.
Yes.
In terms of like, you can see that she has like touches of like, oracle elements to her power, and then even the way that she's just able to navigate certain things. And I think her only restriction is herself.
Yeah.
I love the idea of like, that this character that is almost like a ticking time bomb, and we don't, it's like I'm so interested to see how that like develops, if it becomes like a huge disaster or if it becomes this huge like amazing thing. So I think Sinai's definitely I'm reluctant to say one of my favorite characters, although at the same time there's something about Nala that always kind of like brings you back, where it's just like, Nala, she's got such heart, she's just got such like passion, like there's she is like, I think when I look at like what's between the two girls, I think there's something about Nala that pulls you through. With Sinai, it's just like that potential that I'm just like, I'm so interested to write. So I think them. And then in the second book, I think Eni was the one that kind of just like, my heart was with Eni, because of all the things that he has gone through and will go through, and then it's also just, I think it's based on that the similar thing that I was kind of like drawn towards tonight with, which is like the interesting things I get to write about these characters. I think Eni is one that I'm super interested to write about, sort of like his journey, which definitely draws me in towards him as a character
as well. Yeah, no, I'm like I said, I'm really interested to see more about him as well. But and just finally, where can people find you, your book, where will it be released and when?
Yes, well, I'm everywhere, like sort of like the Twitter, Instagram, TikTok recently, under at Reni K Amayo, so RENIKAMAYO, and you can get the book. You should be able to get the book really anywhere you get books. Also, the bookshops, Waterstones, Amazon, if you're that way inclined. And you can actually get signed copies from Onwe, so www.onwe.co.
Onwe Press, isn't it?
Yes. You can get signed copies from the publisher, and then I was thinking, what else? There's something else I'm forgetting here, but then I realized what it is. The book comes out in October, the 5th of October. That's the official release date. But definitely get to pre-ordering, because that does play like a big part in like the whole like journey life. But so it's coming out soon.
Really soon. My goodness, around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. I'm super excited to get it out and to see what people think and everything.
That's really great. I feel really privileged to have been able to read it before it's coming out, and I had a great time like reading through with the characters, exploring each journey, and it was really a whirlwind. So I really I'm really thankful to be able to talk to you and share that journey with you as well, and I look forward to everyone else enjoying the book as well. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode and just the past 10 or 11 episodes I've brought out, because one of my announcements is that I'm going to go on a short hiatus whilst I figure out what I want to do next with the episode, which I have plans already, just need to get it into motion. So just thank you for being with me for these past 20 or so episodes, and don't worry, I'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can catch me on my social media platforms, which is bythefire_pod on Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, as well as Facebook. So I'm really active on there. So even though I won't be releasing episodes in the near future. I'll definitely still be releasing proverbs and other mythology across the Black diaspora. Also, if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, you can catch the episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud and Apple Podcast, and use the hashtag BTFpod so we can continue the conversation online. And then my big announcement is that I've joined forces with Grim and Perilous Studios to bring you a book called Beyond the Fire, a manual of perilous creatures from across the Black diaspora. And this is like a pocket guide for their role-playing game, Frames of Freedom. And each volume contains 4 supernatural threats that I helped write. And yeah, I really hope you enjoy it. Like, purchase, play the game as well. It was really great working with Adam and Ken and the rest of the team. And yes, I really hope you enjoy playing that if you're an RPG person. If you're not, get into it because they're really fun. And don't forget that you can support me on my Ko-fi, where I post exclusive content. And if you have a creature or folklore you'd like to hear or would like to be a guest on the show, feel free to email bythefire at bythefire.mail@gmail.com. Catch you next time when I decide to finally add fuel to the fire. But for now, I think the fire can rest. Bye!